Nearly one-fifth of the world's oil route stopped behaving like a normal route. On March 12, 2026, the International Energy Agency said the world was facing the largest oil supply disruption ever recorded. It estimated that oil supply would fall by 8 million barrels per day in March, equal to almost 8% of global demand. One day earlier, the IEA's 32 member countries agreed to release 400 million barrels from emergency reserves. What changed was not only the war around Iran. What changed was the operating condition of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passage between Iran and Oman, that carries a huge share of the world's oil and gas traffic. The geographic exposure runs outward quickly. China, India, Japan, and South Korea are the biggest buyers of crude that normally moves through Hormuz toward Asia. Europe is exposed too, because Gulf oil moving west still depends on the Bab el-Mandeb, the Suez Canal, and the SUMED pipeline after it leaves the Arabian Sea. Qatar's LNG exports matter as well, because the same corridor carries around one-fifth of global LNG trade. The system map is visual and simple. Oil leaves Gulf fields and export terminals such as Ras Tanura, moves through the Strait of Hormuz, crosses the Arabian Sea, and heads toward refineries in India, China, Japan, South Korea, and Europe. The corridor is physically narrow, but the scale is huge. EIA and IEA data show that close to 20 million barrels per day of oil usually pass through the strait, and more than 20% of global LNG trade uses the same route. Named bottlenecks appeared immediately. Saudi Arabia can bypass part of the route through the east-west pipeline from Abqaiq to Yanbu on the Red Sea. The UAE can move some crude through the Abu Dhabi pipeline to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman. But those alternatives are limited. They cannot replace normal Hormuz volumes. Marine war risk insurance also jumped sharply. Some tankers paused near Oman. Others waited for new routing instructions, cover, or security guidance, before moving again. The operational response showed up in production and refining. Saudi Arabia cut output by about 2 million barrels per day, to around 8 million, after shutting the Safaniya and Zuluf offshore fields. Gulf producers together had already cut at least 10 million barrels per day. Sinopec, China's biggest refiner, began planning crude run cuts of more than 10%, because replacement barrels were not arriving fast enough. The timeline is already visible. The immediate effects are in crude prices, freight quotes, and insurance costs. The short-term effects are in refinery planning, reserve releases, and fuel allocation. The medium-term effects reach diesel, jet fuel, LPG, fertilizer, and household inflation. This matters because the event is not only a war headline. It is the failure of a named corridor that normally keeps ordinary energy systems stable. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 21 miles wide, and the main tanker lanes are much smaller than that. The first daily life effect is fuel, but the pressure does not stay there. Governments are already reacting as if the shock has reached kitchens, car tanks, and monthly budgets. India has told LPG users to avoid panic buying and switch to piped gas where possible. About 333 million Indian households use LPG cylinders, more than 150 million receive gas by pipeline, and about 90% of India's LPG imports come from the Middle East. Daily booking requests rose to about 7.6 million, from 5.5 million on March 1. Ports are now giving priority berthing to LPG carriers, and households, hospitals, and educational institutions are getting first claim on supply. That is one direct infrastructure to household link. A delayed LPG carrier at a Gulf route affects Indian port schedules, then cylinder filling, then household cooking. The chain is short. The system notices quickly. Transport is the second channel. When war risk insurance rises, crude shipments slow, and refiners pay more for replacement barrels, diesel and petrol become more expensive to make and move. That affects buses, taxis, delivery vans, farm equipment, backup generators, and freight trucks. Jet fuel follows the same logic. Airlines do not only see higher crude prices, they also face tight middle distillate markets, route changes, and higher operating costs. Some carriers have already raised fares or fuel surcharges. That means a distant choke point can reach commuting, travel, and courier bills within days. Food comes next. China has already released fertilizer reserves ahead of spring planting, because the Hormuz disruption is threatening nitrogen and phosphate flows. Fertilizer starts in gas and chemical plants, then moves through terminals, ships, storage hubs, barges, rail, and trucks before it reaches fields. If those inputs arrive late, or cost more, crop budgets change. Later, grocery prices change too. A fuel shock becomes a food cost problem by sequence, not by drama. Household goods are exposed through petrochemicals and freight. Plastics, packaging, detergents, synthetic fibers, and many industrial materials all depend on refinery output or gas-linked feedstocks. If refineries cut runs, product exports are restricted, or shipping costs stay high, manufacturers face higher input bills. Some absorb part of that. Some shorten quotes. Some pass the cost along. Families notice it as smaller discounts, more expensive deliveries, and tighter monthly choices. The path is concrete. A tanker is delayed at Hormuz. A refinery revises crude plans. A fuel distributor pays more. A trucking fleet raises charges. A wholesaler protects margins. Then a shop shelf changes price. Not every country feels this at the same speed. But the pattern is already visible across India, China, Europe, and parts of Asia. That is why the daily life story matters. Ordinary people do not buy crude oil, charter tankers, or negotiate insurance cover. They buy LPG cylinders, airline tickets, groceries, courier services, and packaged goods. When one route carries too much of the system, even a faraway disruption can begin showing up inside ordinary budgets, with very little warning. Power bills can move too, where imported gas still matters. This system matters because modern life depends on hidden machinery that usually stays outside attention. The oil market is not only a market. It is a route system. Crude is produced, processed, loaded, insured, shipped, refined, stored, and then turned into fuels and feedstocks that reach households and factories. When that machine is stable, most people never think about it. Petrol appears, LPG arrives, flights leave on time, goods stay on shelves. The headline this week is big because it sits inside that hidden machine. The named infrastructure makes the machine visible. Ras Tanura loads large Saudi export volumes on the Gulf Coast. The Strait of Hormuz is the passage Gulf tankers use to reach Asian refineries. The Abqaiq-Yanbu east-west pipeline lets Saudi Arabia move some crude to Yanbu on the Red Sea, bypassing Hormuz. The Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline runs from inland UAE facilities to Fujairah, outside the strait. Farther west, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Suez Canal, and the SUMED pipeline help move Gulf energy toward Europe. Each asset has a clear function. Together, they create the route map behind normal fuel supply. The system also has scale. In 2025, nearly 20 million barrels per day of oil exports moved through Hormuz. IEA data says about 80% was destined for Asia. Around 93% of Qatar's LNG exports and 96% of the UAE's LNG exports also use the strait. Alternative routes exist, but available bypass capacity is only about 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day. That gap explains why the corridor matters so much. Refineries are part of the same anatomy. They do not simply buy any barrel from anywhere. Grades matter. Sulfur matters. Yield matters. Delivery timing matters. Saudi Arabia's Safaniya and Zuluf fields produce heavy and medium-heavy crude. The pipeline to Yanbu mainly takes light crude. That means even when a bypass route exists, it does not perfectly replace the lost flow. The system is connected, but not frictionless. Institutions are another layer of the machine. The IEA exists because consuming countries need a coordinated response when a route failure becomes too large for markets to handle smoothly. Emergency reserves, stockpile rules, and release mechanisms are not background policy details. They are part of the same operating system as pipelines and terminals. They buy time while producers, refiners, shipping firms, and governments adjust. So part 3 is the map beneath the headline. The event is really about a narrow corridor, a limited set of bypass routes, a specific network of export terminals and refineries, and an emergency coordination structure built for moments exactly like this. The shock looks geopolitical on television. But under that surface, it is an infrastructure story. That is the hidden machine. Price moves alone never tell the full story of route failure this large, or this fast. It also explains why spare production capacity matters less when the route out is constrained. Production in the ground is not the same thing as deliverable supply at a terminal. Pressure spreads through this system in a sequence, and each step changes behavior before the public fully feels it. The event comes first. Shipping through Hormuz stops behaving normally, and produces cut output because export routes no longer look reliable. Then comes hesitation. Tanker owners ask whether to enter the corridor. Insurers recalculate war risk cover. Refiners ask whether the next cargo will arrive on schedule. Buyers hesitate before signing prompt deals. That first pause matters, because it reduces usable supply before every barrel is physically missing. Hesitation then turns into adjustment. Shipping firms reroute what they can. Saudi Arabia pushes more crude toward Yanbu on the Red Sea. The UAE leans on Fujairah outside the strait. Indian ports give LPG carriers priority berthing. Governments review reserves. Refiners revise run plans. Sinopec cuts expected throughput. These are concrete reactions, not market moods. The machine is under stress, so operators start triage. Adjustment becomes cost. War risk insurance climbs. Freight quotes rise. Replacement barrels become more expensive. Jet fuel and diesel margins widen because middle distillates tighten faster than headline crude alone suggests. Airlines add fuel surcharges, or raise fares. Trucking and delivery costs move next. A shock at the corridor becomes a higher invoice somewhere else in the chain. Cost then becomes uncertainty, and uncertainty changes behavior again. Buyers shorten quotes because they do not know tomorrow's shipping cost. Importers protect inventory. Governments prioritize households over industry. India has already rationed LPG access by priority, and pushed commercial users toward alternative fuels. Households respond too. Panic bookings rise. Hoarding becomes a risk. Once people stop trusting the normal flow, demand behavior itself starts adding pressure. Uncertainty then widens into system pressure. States begin emergency releases. Firms defend margins. Carriers with viable routes gain bargaining power. Refineries choose which products to maximize, and which to cut. Exporters try substitution. Importers seek new origins. Some of those replacements work. Many do not work cleanly, because crude grades, pipeline capacity, terminal capacity, and refinery configuration all limit what can be swapped quickly. The world does not wait for a final shortage before reacting. It reroutes, withholds, prioritizes, revises, and protects. The delay spreads outward through decisions first. That sequence is stable enough to describe plainly. Event becomes hesitation. Hesitation becomes adjustment. Adjustment becomes cost. Cost becomes uncertainty. Uncertainty becomes wider pressure on households, firms, and governments. By the time the public sees the full effect, the system has already been behaving differently for days. Traders revise contracts. Utilities watch fuel inventories more closely. Ministries prepare subsidies or tax cuts before public anger rises. Banks price more caution into financing. Shippers protect scarce slots for priority cargoes. Households delay spending while uncertainty lingers. Retailers shorten promotions. Exporters search for substitute cargoes. Public agencies rehearse emergency rules before shortages become fully visible. Utilities delay non-essential purchases, and conserve stocks where they can. This event reveals how much ordinary life depends on systems most people rarely name. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a place on a map. It is part of the operating surface of daily life. Ras Tanura, Abqaiq, Yanbu, Fujairah, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Suez Canal, and the SUMED pipeline all help decide whether cooking gas arrives, whether flights stay affordable, whether diesel keeps moving goods, and whether fertilizer reaches fields on time. Most of the time, that infrastructure remains invisible because it is working. There is resilience in the system. Emergency reserves can be released. Some crude can move through bypass pipelines. Ports can prioritize critical cargoes. Governments can protect households first. Refineries can change product yields. But there is fragility too. The bypass routes are smaller than the main corridor. The spare capacity is limited. The grades are not perfectly interchangeable. The timing is unforgiving. That is the deeper meaning of this event. Stability is not automatic. It is maintained by routes, facilities, contracts, stockpiles, and decisions that have to keep aligning every day. When one narrow waterway stops behaving normally, the public does not first see infrastructure. It sees higher costs, tighter supply, and more anxious policy. What does it mean when so much of ordinary life still depends on a corridor most people rarely think about? Even a short disruption can expose how concentrated everyday normality really is across routes, regions, markets, and households.